Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Neurotech.
Okay, Jennifer French and Jim Cavuto of Neurotech Reports, pleasure to have you on the show again for our second installment of Neurotech Monthly News. Okay, guys, so what is going on this month in the world of neurotechnology?
Thanks for hosting us, Laden. It's great to be here and great to talk to your audience. There's a lot of developments going on in neurotech, and we tried to pick out some of the key topics that we thought were really important in kind of changing the industry. So today we're going to touch on some of the developments in spinal cord stimulation, in sacral nerve modulation, as well as a most recent announcement about epidural stimulation for paralysis. So those are going to be kind of our key topics for today. But let's first dig into some of these industry announcements that happened during this past month. We saw two major developments in spinal cord stimulation. First, Saluda Medical announced their European approval of their Evoke closed-loop spinal cord stimulation system for chronic pain. And secondly, what was announced in the last month is that Abbott gained FDA approval of their Proclaim XR low-dose spinal cord stimulation device with Burst. So those were two kind of major developments that we've seen in the spinal cord stimulation space.
Sorry, can you guys give a brief background about Saluda and Abbott for those uninitiated amongst us that don't really know what these companies are known for or what this especially means for the industry?
Yeah, there's been a lot of competition in the spinal cord stimulation market. New players, new technologies, new approaches, a lot of segmentation going on in SCS, as spinal cord stimulation is often referred to. Initially, it was just the big three players, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and Abbott, who acquired St. Jude Medical a few years ago. And they each had offerings for treating chronic pain with implanted spinal cord stimulation systems, mostly using dorsal column stimulation, traditional tonic stimulation. Well, in recent years, various players have introduced innovations in stimulation waveforms, for instance, burst stimulation instead of tonic stimulation, or where you deliver the stimulation, for instance, dorsal root ganglion instead of the spinal column. And that's offered a little bit of segmentation. Well, a new player that's entered the market is an Australian firm called Saluda Medical, and their whole approach, which is a really promising approach, is closed-loop spinal cord stimulation. And the idea behind closed-loop neuromodulation is don't just deliver the stimulation willy-nilly, but look for signals. And in the case of Saluda, what they're looking for is a signal called ECAP, evoked compound action potential. And this is a biomarker. This is an electrical signal that's indicative that something is happening, that the patient is feeling relief or getting results from the stimulation. And so instead of just always delivering the same stimulation, you use the information from this ECAP signal to control the paradigm of stimulation from their device. Really promising. The trials have produced really good results, and Saluda just recently announced European approval, CE mark approval, and we expect that they'll be competing in the U.S. market probably sometime next year, or not long thereafter.
So what does this mean for the industry? The question is how is this going to change spinal cord stimulation market? Well, this is the first that has a closed loop stimulation system, so a responsive system. So we anticipate that they won't be alone in this very soon. I'm sure there's going to be competitors coming in with a responsive stimulation.
Yeah, and we also think that Saluda is going to make an attractive target for one of the big players in the medical device industry, maybe one of the big three or big four that's involved in the current SCS market. So watch this space. We think things could get very interesting in the years ahead for SCS.
And in that same sense, the Abbott announcement, what does that mean for the industry is that, again, it might not be closed loop, but they're using a different waveform and they're using a low dose. So they're really they're they're playing around with how they're just stimulating, as Jim had mentioned, not just doing willy-dilly stimulation. They're actually looking at doing some really targeted stimulation specifically for pain. So again, that's just another kind of product add-on or product differentiation, if you will, in the marketplace.
Yeah, according to Abbott, using these lower dose signals, it's going to help extend the battery life. So now maybe instead of having to go with a rechargeable system, you can have a device lasting 10 years without having to replace the battery. That's certainly better for the patient because surgery would be required to replace that battery in a primary cell device. And I think we're going to see more innovations like this, innovations in the waveform, innovations in the stimulation paradigm that become more efficient, more effective for the patient.
And currently according to our market research that we've been looking at in terms of the implanted spinal stimulator market, particularly worldwide, we're projecting it to be around a $3.35 billion market by 2022. And will these developments change that? Probably. They'll probably play into the growth, our estimated growth rates for this type of space, which we're currently looking at about 13%, but it might impact that going forward.
Cool. This is very exciting stuff, and I especially like the deeper background of what Saluda, kind of the I don't know, David versus Goliath, and how this looks like. So that's very interesting to me.
Well, speaking of David versus Goliath, here's another example of a David taking aim with its slingshot at the Goliath. In this case, Medtronic, which is the market leader in many forms of neuromodulation, and certainly the area of stimulation for treating urinary and fecal incontinence. Medtronic has, in many respects, owned that market until just recently. So the upstart David in this story is a company out of Orange County in California called Axonics Modulation. They have a rechargeable device that's recently received approval and entered the market for treating incontinence. Jen, do you want to throw your 2 cents in here?
So it's interesting, yes. So, Medtronic has been the Goliath in this market space with their InterStim device for quite some time. And really there was no other major competition for them, particularly for fecal incontinence and for sacral nerve modulation. So Axonics is just entering the market in the U.S. with their U.S. approval. But what was even more interesting, adding to the drama of the story, is that almost immediately Medtronic came out with an announcement that they were submitting to the FDA their InterStim micro neurostimulator along with an MRI compatible lead. So it's almost a direct response to what Axonics.
Almost as if they saw it coming, huh, Jen? Makes you wonder if there's any relationship there between those two announcements. Maybe just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence, maybe, but it's also interesting that the tack that Axonics made is because, that we've used sacral nerve stimulation for urinary incontinence as well as fecal incontinence. Now, when you look at the marketplace of, which one is the better indication to go after from a business perspective, from our market research in the market for bioelectronic medicine, we kind of looked at those gastric and fecal disorders to have a strong growth rate of 77% over the next 5 years. So it's a high growth rate. So it kind of justifies why Axonics is going after fecal incontinence first before they start going after a large market, but maybe without the large growth rate in urinary incontinence. What do you think, Jim?
Well, the Axonics makes it clear that they have an additional PMA filing under review with the FDA for overactive bladder, which includes urinary urge incontinence as well as urinary frequency incontinence and for urinary retention. Those are still, prime markets and probably eclipse the opportunity for fecal incontinence. But it might be that this was low-hanging fruit. At any rate, there's definitely opportunities here. And it'll be interesting to see how the two firms, Medtronic and Axonic, segment out and compete in the sacral nerve, implanted sacral nerve stimulation industry in the years ahead.
And I see here also that Neuron and University of Wisconsin got a $2 million award from the NIH. This is exciting stuff. I hadn't heard about this. Do you guys want to talk about this? Because both of those are friends of the podcast.
Friends of the podcast, friends of ours. We want to point out that Neuron and their CEO and founder, Manfred Frank, chose our event, the Neurotech Leaders Forum, last year in 2018, as the first location to announce their technology for their novel peripheral nerve stimulation device. Reminds me, of course, that our 2019 Neurotech Leaders Forum is coming up in just a couple of weeks in San Francisco. And just as we did last year with Neuron, we'll have some exciting new startups presenting there as well. So, we want to congratulate Neuron. We want to congratulate Kip Ludwig, whose lab at the University of Wisconsin was successful in securing this $2 million award through the NIH's HEAL initiative.
And the HEAL initiative is interesting because it's a direct funding mechanism to combat the opioid crisis that's going on in the U.S. today. So Kip Ludwig has put together a powerhouse team in this grant to really look at specifically at back pain and in the development of these, for lack of a better term, a liquid injectable electrode to be able to treat chronic pain and so people can have alternatives away from the typical opioid that's being used today. So they're looking at something that's minimally invasive that can be injected in a clinician's office. And so we're really excited to see how this will develop over time and help to change the way that we treat pain. Not only in the U.S., but worldwide.
Let's talk about some really exciting things that are happening, brand new developments that were just announced yesterday, and we will be reporting on in greater depth in the next issue of Neurotech Business Report. And that has to do with the market for treating the Neurotech market for treating paralysis caused by spinal cord injury. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening here?
Yeah, recently we've seen two developments, one on the research side and one on the commercialization side. On the research side, DARPA recently announced a new program called Bridging the Gap Plus, and that is a specific 5-year program for the target of spinal cord injury. And the program is looking at the whole phases of spinal cord injury. So from acute to subacute to chronic, particularly understanding what happens in the spinal cord when an injury occurs. How can we watch the evolution of the injury, and how can we figure out biomarkers to help decrease the swelling that happens, which leads to paralysis. But also, it's looking at developing combination technologies specifically for restoration of function for those that are living with chronic spinal cord injury. So it's a really interesting program that's coming out. What makes me really excited about it is usually when DARPA puts their money behind something, they also want to see some translation or a commercial partner. So it's really promising to see that they'll be pushing this side of research specifically for spinal cord injury. And right before this announcement, about a week before that, they had mentioned that they awarded a $6.3 million grant to a team at Brown University to be looking at mechanisms within the spinal cord and what type of technologies they can use.
This is phenomenal news. I think, in fact, something we've been tracking for the 19 years we've been publishing Neurotech Business Report. When we launched in 2001, we were really interested in seeing developments in neuroprosthetics to restore function to people living with spinal cord injury. And of course, many of our readers will remember the important work that Christopher Reeve did while he was alive to help build awareness, to help fund research, to help hasten the development of cures or at least therapies that would be helpful for people living with paralysis. The Reeve Foundation over the years has done quite a bit to raise the level of awareness within the public and within the media. It's also worth pointing out that Jen French herself has been very active in this, not just through what she's done with this publication, but with Neurotech Network, and also her involvement with the North American Spinal Injury Consortium. We're really excited to see not just this development funding level from the Pentagon, DARPA, but also some really encouraging developments on the commercial front, and that is the very recent announcement that GTX Medical, a European company, has merged with the American firm Neuro Recovery Technologies. And basically, these two previously disparate efforts to commercialize neurostimulation devices for treating paralysis are now going to be housed under the same roof. It's going to be one company. Very interesting development. GTX, which is based largely, or at least initially, on the work from Professor Courtine at EPFL in Switzerland, has made very interesting progress. And Professor Courtine's team recently, last year, certainly got a lot of press and publicity for success they had with paralyzed patients who were able to walk again, to take steps. So we're following this. However, as with any merger, there's issues. We have, in the case of this area of research, three well-known researchers, namely Professor Courtine, Professor Edgerton from UCLA, and Professor Harkema from the University of Louisville, all who have been involved in one way or another. And Jen, you have a lot of insight on the personalities here. What do you think we have in store for us?
Well, talk about industry drama. That's we see this happen within the research side. That a lot of these labs, although they do respect each other scientifically, they typically don't play together in the sandbox very well. But I do put my hats off to Dr. Jacques Deckers, who is the CEO and leading the effort of GTX Medical, where he is really building a consortium. And as he says, he's joining forces around the world to be able to tackle this problem of paralysis. So really hats off to him to try to pool together the resources around the world that has been created. And I think that the other exciting development of this is that GTX Medical is not just focused on the research, they're focused on the commercialization and the translation of the technology out into the marketplace. So he understands the role of the researchers on doing the basic research behind this, but it's creating a business model to translate it out, which has been a frustrating piece that we've seen alongside. The creation of the holding company is really interesting because Neuro Recovery Technologies, which was based out of Southern California, they've been struggling to raise money over the years. However, they're now folded into this holding company. What's also folded into this holding company is the investment that the Reeve Foundation has made over the years. So they are involved with this company as well. And so when we talk about technologies, what makes this interesting too is that they're pursuing two paths with this company in terms of stimulating the spinal cord, or what they call epidural stimulation, to restore function. So on the GTX side, or on the European side, they're focusing on epidural stimulation or implanted epidural stimulation specifically for paraplegia, for locomotion of lower limbs. So they're looking at an implanted device, they're particularly looking at locomotion, and they're looking at paraplegia. Whereas the other path, they're looking at transcutaneous spinal cord stimulation. So it's non-invasive stimulation, but more so that focus is on the restoration of hand and arm function for quadriplegia. So a non-invasive upper extremity restoration for quadriplegia. So they're really taking two different paths, but where these paths cross is that both of them are looking at how this impacts autonomic function for people living with paralysis. And a lot of the research that's been happening behind this is saying, that might be the low-hanging indication to get your regulatory approval. And then you can start looking at these bigger challenges of locomotion
and Jen, if I can just interject a comment that we heard from Dr. Deckers, the CEO of GTX, in an exclusive interview he did with Neurotech Business Report, referring to some of this competition that exists among some of the key researchers in this area. He said something I thought was very noteworthy. To quote him, He said these scientists have a moral obligation to stop their fighting. And I think that that's really significant because it indicates that the company, sure, they want to make money, but they really see that there's an important goal here, an important societal goal, and that is tending to the unmet medical needs of people who are living with paralysis, to really fulfill on that dream or that promise that Christopher Reeve put forth more than a decade ago. Which was, to restore function, to have him walking again in his lifetime. Unfortunately, we didn't get to achieve that for Christopher Reeve, but there's a good possibility that we will be able to achieve that for a generation of people who've come after him. So again, we'll have more details on this as well as some of the interesting scientific personalities involved in this area. In the next issue of Neurotech Business Report. So look for it.
Yeah, so you guys have been very excited about this. I guess I still don't really understand why, beyond maybe a merger, a combining of momentum, of funds, that this is such exciting news. So why is it so exciting?
So one of the things, and I particularly have been watching epidural stimulation and spinal cord stimulation for the restoration of function for people living with paralysis over the years. And there is a real foundation of science behind this. There's been a lot of animal studies in several labs around the world looking at these types of function, and not only in the labs that we mentioned, but in other labs as well. So this is the first indication that we're seeing of concerted effort to make a translation, to commercialize a device and to get it onto the marketplace. I think that's one of the really exciting pieces of this, as well as really the bold efforts of GTX Medical and Dr. Deckers to unite the forces around the world to be able to solve this very complex problem.
Well, and with that, I think we'll finish up this month's, I think we should also say which month it is, October 2019's updates on the Neurotech world. Thank you guys so much for coming on again for this monthly installment. This is really interesting stuff, and I've loved how you guys were able to break it down and say exactly what it means. I thought that was really cool. So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you,
Thanks for having us.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.